A lot of people struggle with CSS and JavaScript, each for their own different reasons, but my friend, I've long found that HTML might be the hardest of all of the web's languages. And that's because while it might be easy to get stuff on the page, that doesn't mean that you're actually doing it right. If you make a mistake with CSS, often nothing will happen, or maybe the wrong thing happens, but you can see it because CSS is visual and whatever you're trying to do just isn't working the way you wanted it to. And at least you know that right away. With JavaScript, you'll run into errors. Things just don't do anything at all. You can look in your console and hopefully that tells you what's wrong. But there's different things along the way that are letting you know that you're doing things wrong. And that's not the case when it comes to HTML. Now, in HTML, sometimes you can make a mistake and it's obvious, like if there's a heading that's not closed or something like that. But the browser will even close a lot of missing tags for you if you forget to close them. And as far as what tag to use in what situation, the browser doesn't know the context of what's going on. That's up to you to figure out. And that's how we decide what tags to use. So the browser just assumes you've used the right one and rolls with whatever you're doing. But that doesn't actually mean that it's correct. And to show how hard HTML is, I put a challenge out to my Discord community, asking them to write the HTML for this that we see on screen right now. Very simple, small card, and in the end there were 61 submissions that went a long way to proving that HTML is actually really, really hard to write. Now, luckily for me, Ragnar, who's a member of my Discord community, which is linked down below, by the way, created this spreadsheet going through and organizing everything, including sort of the DOM order, the elements used for everything, and whether the person was trolling or not, so we could easily filter those out. And just to make this one simple element, there were 51 actual submissions, because I said there's 10 troll submissions that did come in there that we're filtering out for our purposes today. And out of those 51 submissions that we did get, the variance between them is absolutely incredible. Over half of them are completely unique in how they approach things, and that's ignoring class names, because that would be kind of boring if we just looked at what class names people put on things. I just wanted to focus on the structure of the HTML. And we had versions where there was 4 elements used. We had other ones where there was 10 elements used. And it begs the question on creating something as simple as this, why is there so much variation? And it's because HTML is just really hard. And the general misunderstandings that can come, and part of it, I won't lie, is the lack of context of just giving one little thing like this without having a bigger picture to put it in does make it a little bit trickier as well. Though I did give some guidance within the challenge that some people ignored and that we'll talk about as we go through this. But I think it's a really good idea to break this down and explore what people did, the main approaches that were used, and ways that could be improved, mistakes that were somewhat common where people were maybe trying a little bit too hard, and a few other things along the way to talk about all the things we can learn from something that could be as simple as 4 elements. And not only did I challenge the people in my community to do this, I also asked AI to do it for me. And we're going to see that right at the end, just to see if it could do, is it similar to what people would write, or if there's any major issues that it could do. And I will say there was a bit of a flaw in the approach. I didn't do comprehensive testing. I didn't feel like, going across all of them. Maybe there's one of the other ones would have done better. I used Claude, and it highlights an important problem that I've seen with AI creating things in general. But first, I don't even want to worry about that. I want to talk about why HTML is so hard. And we're going to dive into the most common setup that people in my community used first. And to be able to do that, we're going to start with this that we see right here, which is sort of the statistically speaking most common approach that was taken, where we had an article element that was wrapping around a list for the tag that's at the top, that had that as a list item, an H3, a paragraph, and then a link down at the bottom. That's what, statistically speaking, again, the most people took. And right away, you might be saying, oh, that looks perfect. Or you might be saying, well, I'm not too sure about this. But just really fast, one of the things that we'll mention now is even if we ignore the elements used, because not everyone had this as a list, and if they listened to my instructions, they wouldn't have, because I did say it will always only be one tag on every single card in the the instructions for it. So if ever you're doing a job interview or something and they're giving you something like this, make sure you read the instructions very clearly. But so this could have been a span or something else like that. Ignoring the elements that are being used, though, this was the most common order that was used as well, where 42 people went with having the tag, the title, the description, and then the link down here at the bottom. Some people had it as a button. Most people did have it as a link. But I did say 42 people went with this order, which means that there were 9 people that actually came in with a different order. And well, that begs the question, why would you come in with a different order? It's quite clearly the tag, the title, the paragraph, the link. And so we will talk about that in a little bit. I mean, are any of those approaches actually better or not? But before we get to that, I want to talk about the semantics a little bit here, because most people did use an article here, but there were a lot of people, and actually a lot of the early submissions, interestingly, used sections. And I actually thought at one point that it would be the most common, but we ended up with 11 people using sections for this. Setting things up like this. And for me, this was interesting and not surprising. But it's also because a lot of people don't know that the section being used like this might as well just be a div. If I wrote this HTML or I wrote this HTML, there's not actually a difference between the two of them. And right now you're probably going, but Kevin, section is a semantic element. It means something, but it doesn't actually do anything unless you have a title that it's connected to. So if you have a section and then you have a heading, which you should have a heading in your section, you'd want this to have an ID on it. So ID could be, card title, but every card title doesn't matter. Every one of them would have to have its own ID. Hopefully you're not, if you're doing it by hand, I guess you could do it. But if you're looping through, you could throw the ID on there easy enough or generate an ID for each one. And if that's being generated, you could easily enough come on here, because to actually make this section like a landmark region, which you're expecting it to be based on how, just what you hear about it, this would have to have an area labeled by, and then here I would have my card title like that. And so now this section has an area labeled by, which then connects it to this heading that's right here. And now this becomes a landmark region. Now, interestingly, out of the 11 people who set this up as a section, 2 people did do this. So good on you guys for using the area labeled by with your section, because it is something that most people don't seem to realize about sections is you do need to have that connection if you want the section to be more than just a div, which is what you generally probably want if you're using a section, right? If not, you would have just used a div. And whether or not this should even be a section, I'm not so sure. To me, a section is probably something a little bit bigger. Like we could have a section that would have all of the cards in it. Maybe that would make sense. But it would, I guess, depend again on the context a little bit. In this mini context, I don't think a small element like this really should be a section, but this is one of the reasons HTML is hard, is because it's all about the semantics of things, meaning we have to find the meaning, which means we can justify it. And so somebody might be going, no, Kevin, this should be a section and this is the right way to do it. And if you're one of those people, leave a comment to let me know why, because I'm always trying to hear more sides to the story of these things. But as I did say, most people went with article. There were some people that went with div, by the way. Most people went with an article. And of all the people that did go with an article, interestingly enough, 4 of them actually did use the area labeled by, and which is fine. There's no harm in doing this. So if you want to do it, you can. But articles are different than sections in that you don't need to do that. If we take this off and take this off, this is working the same way our section with the area labeled by was working, because an article will take the first heading in it to identify that article. So we don't need to explicitly connect the article to our heading the same way we would with a section. The browser's able to do that implicitly just by having a heading in here. It will always look at the first heading level that's in there. I'm guessing the highest heading level that's in there is my guess, which does talk about order, which we'll be talking more about the order in a little bit. I want to go back to the idea of this being a div though, because there were a number of people. It was 8 people who had it as a div. And this is where I want to talk a little bit about, I guess, the idea of semantics. And just talked about area labeled by and just area in general and roles and all those things that we want to be really careful with, because one person on here did put a role is equal to feed. And this is a really interesting role if you've never seen it. It's not something that you hear or see a lot about. But for a feed, it's meant for areas where there's infinite scrollers. And the feed wouldn't be each element that's in the infinite scroller. It's on the section, probably, that has all of those infinite thingies that are generated and coming in there. So if ever you do have something that's just an infinite scroller, so the content's, as the user's scrolling down, it's pulling in the content and adding it to the DOM, then on the parent of that element, you actually would want to use this role equals feed, but you wouldn't want it on an individual element like this. And this is the first thing of many where I think, because I was explicitly asking people to make decisions on something as simple as this, they started thinking a little bit too hard about things maybe, which definitely happens a lot because we're so focused on that, and you're trying to do things the correct way, and you come out with some interesting things like this role as feed. And there was a few other ARIA things that came up along the way that we're going to talk about. But the main thing with ARIA, which definitely is a huge topic, which can feel very overwhelming, is don't use it unless you really need to have it. You have okay, this is the reason. You should be able to explain very well why it's there, such as my ARIA labeled by, I needed that if I'm using a section to connect it to the title to make my section a landmark region. In general, though, the best ARIA is no ARIA, right? So we want to use things perhaps like our article. Now, I did have a discussion with one user who was saying, do we really want every one of the cards? Say there's 30 cards. Do you want them all to be articles? Because then they're all landmark regions. And maybe that's not a good thing, depending on how things are set up and what the screen reader experience ends up being, right? Because when somebody's using assistive technology, maybe it's annoying that there's tons of landmark regions. And that is one of those situations where it's probably best to test or to ask users who are using them. And I don't have a specific answer. I will say that article probably does make sense here, though you could argue that because we're saying feature, maybe it doesn't. Right? Maybe this actually does make sense as a div, and the article would live further out. Article here and the close article here, because you might end up having feature and something else, and they're all part of a bigger picture. And this little tag there saying feature makes me think that maybe this shouldn't be one, because something that is an article needs to be able to stand on its own, regardless of the other content that's around it. So often for something like a blog post, that's fine. Like for example, let's jump on over to Smashing Magazine's website. And if we come take a look here, and this is very common on all blog websites, if you take a look in there, we have the article here for this one. And then of course, that means if that one's the article, this one here is also going to be an article. And each one of these is an article. And that might seem a bit weird because you want to look at the bigger picture of it, but these can definitely stand on their own. This is the title of the article. This is the information about the article. And then if you want to pre-order the book, we can. Or if we want to get into it, the link is actually the heading. So we can dive into that article and get more about it. We have the author's name. And then we do have some tags down here at the bottom. So, we have the date it was published and the bigger, what tags does this fit into? So again, this is where having more context here could be useful, but maybe this doesn't really stand on its own. Like never miss important meetings. What's making us not miss important meetings, right? So elementary tracks all the events. Okay, we get a bit more context there. By the way, I know there's a typo in here somewhere, elementary. I just grabbed a screenshot from somewhere. So this is something I created. I put typos and stuff all the time, so I won't say that it doesn't happen, and I don't blame the person who created this because I always have typos, but just maybe this is just the name and it's elementary or whatever is, I don't know. It doesn't matter. So maybe we have enough context here for this to be an article, but I'm just throwing that maybe not. Maybe it should be part of something that's the article or a section. So the context of everything does matter. Is what I'm trying to say there. So having an isolated thing like this can make it a little bit harder. Let's say that we did actually want this to be an article, though. No ARIA needed then because we have our heading in there. And then actually, interestingly enough, speaking of this area, whether people used a list or not, and speaking of semantic tags, there were a lot of people who put a header up here and included this in the header. I don't really think this is necessary for this part. There were some people that also included the actual heading in there, but it was less. It was like most people saw this as like, this is my article. This is some supplemental information that's going in the heading. Here's the main part of it. And then even fewer people did include a footer here, which for me, when I looked at this, I did not see a header and footer in here. So I wouldn't, but that's just because I don't know. I don't think we need them for something small like this. I especially don't think we need the read more link in a footer. I don't see that as footer information. I see that as part of the main thing, but Yeah, I'm not sure about that. The header as well, less so. Maybe you could make an argument that this should have the header because it's sort of supplementary, and then we're getting to the title that's down here. I think maybe if you're going to do anything, an H group would make the most sense here, though H group doesn't really do anything at the moment. But the idea of what the H group would do, this would probably make the most sense, to be honest, if we were going to set it up like this. I don't think the header would actually hurt anything or get in the way if you did include it. I just don't think we really need to have it there. So yeah, I don't think we need that so much. But H group is an interesting option that was used by at least one person, I think. I don't remember now, and I didn't put it in my notes. Sorry about that. Another thing that somebody did, though, that this was only one person, they used a DL for a description list. So I think the entire thing was the description list, or maybe it was the top. And then, so the heading was the definition, and this is the part, the main text was explaining it. I understand the idea. I think definition lists are way underused, but I don't think this is the right situation for a description list, just because of the type of thing that's in here. Maybe you could make the argument on a bigger picture again of you have all of these never miss important meetings, like you have all these different things. We're not really defining, we're not defining the product, we're defining the feature. So I can, again, the joy of semantics, and the reason HTML is hard is because you could make an argument for it that would make sense a lot of the time. But for me, it's not quite the right use case for them. But maybe that's why they're used, is because we can never find the right use cases for them, or make arguments for doing things another way. But yeah, I just saw in my notes, we do have 10 people who did put the footer in there. I don't know if I mentioned that before, but I'll bring that up. That we did have that for 10 people down there. But what was, I think, more interesting with the link, whether or not we put it in a footer, which in my opinion, it shouldn't be. I don't think that's really what footers are made for. But I do think the link brings up some really interesting topics in that, should it even be a link? There was someone who had this as a span, for example. And on their span, they did it with an ARIA hidden is equal to true with the read more. I'm not going to worry about the arrow that's there. There's a few different people that mentioned, it could come in with generated content with CSS. It could just be a span that's coming from something like Font Awesome. I'm not too stressed about that. There's lots of decent ways to bring in the arrow. But I thought that was interesting. There was this one that did this as a span, and it's like, ooh, okay, why would that be a span? Can you imagine, if we did it as a span, then why does it look like this? And what they did is they actually had the title as the link. So here inside the H3, we had the A href is equal to, and then a close A here. And then this was the title went in there, and that became the clickable thing. And they had a way to then make the entire card clickable, so this didn't really matter. And the learn more text in general tends to be problematic. It's one of those things that we're so used to seeing. It's such a common pattern that it's just everywhere now. And I think visually speaking, if you're a sighted user, never miss your important meetings, learn more. You get it, right? But in general, link text should have a little bit more context to it. So let's say for now, we'll come back to this approach in a second, but let's just say we did want this to stay as a link. And I'm going to take the class off of here for now. And we're going to take this off of here for now as well. And let's just say we did have this is our read more here. There's two approaches, or it should have been learn more. I do apologize. Learn more. There's two different approaches that we could use to making this a little bit better. One of them is, and I've done this a lot, is add a span here with a class of visually hidden, or SR only, visually hidden. And in that span, let's just make this a little bit more readable. In this span right here, you could add more context, close span, about elementaries tracking features, let's say, wherever it goes. Give some context about what we're learning more about, just so somebody who is using something like a screen reader gets that extra context about what that link actually is, because depending on how they're navigating the page, and there's many different ways they can navigate through the page, they might have skipped over part of this and just got straight to the link, and then having that extra information about it can be useful. Another option here, and if you don't want to do that, because it does take a little bit more work, and maybe you're pulling all your stuff in from, you have an API that's filling out all your cards and everything. You're just pulling in the information. The other option is, once again, to have this have an ID on it. This is my title. And then here we can do an ARIA described by is equal to the title right here. So we just want to link the two of them. Somebody did mention this the other day, that I do interchange single quotes and double quotes. I just let Prettier handle that for me. So apologies if that drives you insane. But yeah, having a ID here and then connecting that link to this is one of the ways that we can also help assistive technologies out a little bit to make it better for them. It will give them the additional context in some of the ways that they're navigating through the page. There are times, and I don't know enough about screen readers to talk about it in depth, but I do know, and I'm going to put links to like a whole bunch of stuff down below about everything we're talking about today, so do go and check out those. But this does work in some contexts, but it won't give it to them in all contexts. So just to be aware of that, but it is a common approach to use. But we can go back to this just being a span. And one way, or we'll go to one approach and then the approach I actually prefer, just because what one person did was actually make the entire thing the link. And I think they probably had, I don't remember if the link was on the outside or if it was the first thing inside here. I will say do not do that. There's two reasons we don't want to do that. First of all, it's annoying for styling, but that's not the important reason. But it does mean that you have to like remove all your underlines and worry about the text colors and everything else. But you do see it a lot, and you're allowed to put anything in links now. Links are inline elements, so it used to be that you couldn't put block stuff inside of the links. These days, that's completely fine. So you can technically do this. The problem is that with everything being the link, say somebody was using a screen reader, if they get to that link, it reads all of the text to them for that link, which can be really, really annoying, because really, like a sighted user, you can skim it, you can see the read more, click on the read more, and you're fine, right? So I wouldn't suggest wrapping everything in there. The easier thing to do, and this is whether you have the learn more down here, or let's say this is just the span that you're putting an ARIA hidden on. So you're hiding that away because it doesn't really matter in terms of the context for a screen reader. And then over on this, you put your link over here, and whatever element is your link, this is going to work on, right? So our link is inside our H3. What you can do is in your CSS, you have your card is going to get a position of relative on it, relative, and then your link. So in this case, it would be my card A. Let's say, however you want to select your link is completely up to you. But what you really want to do here is select either the before or after. So let's go with an after on here. Doesn't matter which one you do. Where you're going to throw a position of absolute on this, and then put an inset of 0, which is a top, left, bottom, and right of 0. So it actually takes up the entire space. Of course, this does also need a content on there. And what that's doing is it's taking the pseudo element that's now covering your entire card. So it makes the link the size of the entire card. And then if you do want to, say this is still a focusable element, because depending on how you set things up, or it really depends on how you set things up. But instead of just having the card A focus, you're right. So instead of styling the link itself, what you might use is the card focus within, and then you could style the entire card, or you could change styling within the elements that are in there. So card focus within dot, pseudo button, or whatever you called the button that's down, fake button that's down there at the bottom. You could style that, or whatever it is. You can find visual clues on doing it quite easily with this type of selector here. So this is a really, really common approach. And if you do want to make the entire card clickable, this is what I would probably suggest that you do. The only drawback with it is it means the text within that is not selectable anymore, because the entire thing's a link. So if you try and select it, it just does that weird grabby thing instead. For small amounts of text like this, probably not the end of the world. But again, it depends on your use case. So you might want to come up with something else, or maybe you just leave the heading as the clickable thing, or you have there's a few different approaches, but this is probably the one I would go with if I was doing something like this. I do quite like that approach for that, which means, having this as a hidden span might be what you actually want to do, which is kind of interesting. Now, I want to circle back to maybe the most contentious part for the entire thing, for me anyway, which is the tag at the top. It seems like an easy thing. As I did mention, in my instructions, I said there could only ever be one on any given card. That was like the one piece of context I gave. So I don't think having it as a list does make a ton of sense. But let's, in the context of maybe you could have 2 or 3 different tags on there, maybe having it as a list then does make sense. I would probably be more tempted to make this a span feature. But this also is kind of weird in a way, right? Let's just look at the image and not worry about the context, or let's read the text, and not worry about the markup for a second, where we have feature, never miss your important meetings. Elementary tracks all the events. So if I'm reading it like that, is never miss your important meetings the heading, or is feature the heading? You could probably make an argument that feature would be the heading, but feature is a weird heading in that it doesn't really give us a ton of context. And in a way, the feature is never miss your important meetings. It sort of all comes together. Because one idea was actually, and some people did this where the heading came first, and I do want to talk about this idea where it's never miss your important meetings. So or the heading is first. And I think this is a really important thing to cover. And the people who did this, which they were in the minority, but I do think it's correct to a certain extent, in that having the heading first most of the time makes the most sense. And this is like a lot of the time you'll see cards that we have an image on the top, then a heading, then some text or whatever. It's one of those times where you should be using CSS to elevate the image on top, because heading levels create the structure of your document. And I'm going to link to a more in-depth video that talks more about this, but you can think of it like a table of contents. So if the feature is up here, it says feature, and it's a span or a list or whatever else, this feature doesn't really, this feature, technically speaking, well, it's a little bit harder because we're in an article, so I guess it would depend on the context there. But so it's within this landmark region, but the heading levels are really what's responsible for making it. So let's just say we had an H3 up here for the previous card. This is sort of falling under this H3 now. And then this is creating the next part of your document in terms of the table of contents of how your document is organized. And so that doesn't really make much sense. And this is especially true with images, and it's a lot easier of a story if you have an image where you just want to elevate it up. You just use your CSS, you have a flex or grid or whatever just to change the order of it. You don't want to mess with order too often, but that's one of the cases where it makes a lot of sense, is to elevate images or other things where the heading is the very first thing and then the image can just be pulled up. In this case though, when I'm looking at this, the more I looked at it, the more I thought what I would actually want to do is something like this, where it almost feels like, maybe I'd have to hide this somehow, but just from a reading it from a document perspective, it almost makes more sense to say feature, never miss your important meetings as a singular heading. That's the heading. Because I don't see feature being a higher level heading, because again, that would be weird in a sense that you'd have, say, your H2 for this entire section or whatever, and then you have all these mini, a feature heading, but then 3 cards later you have another feature heading. That feels a little disconnected and a little bit weird to me. I don't know. I am not sold on this, and I'm not sure what the best approach for this is. Is it using the H group? But the problem with the H group right now is that semantically it doesn't actually do anything. But the idea, I think, of this makes sense if this was wrapped in an H group. But as it stands now, maybe this makes more sense. I'd love to know your opinion on this. Leave it in the comments, because HTML is hard, and this is these are the types of things where I do get stuck on them, and I sit there and I think about it, and people are going to say, Kevin, why are you wasting your time on that? Just go with feature, just follow the order that's here. Feature and title, paragraph, regular link down at the bottom. Who cares? I care. And I think you should care too. And if you're watching this and you've got this far in, you probably agree with me that you should care. But it's one of those things where I think it's really important that we spend the time to get these types of things right, to make a website that's not only just looks okay, hopefully, and it's not broken visually, but that makes sense from the ground up, and that we're taking the care to build these things that we're building. And I understand sometimes you're on deadlines and you can't sit there, your sprint has you having to work on this, and the other parts of it are going to take a lot more time. So you're not going to spend 2 hours on your HTML, and I don't want you to spend 2 hours on your HTML, but I do want you to spend more time thinking about the HTML before just throwing it in there and assuming that it's fine. And sometimes you'll make mistakes, and that's okay. especially when it comes to things like now you're looking at like, oh, do I need ARIA rules or should I do other things like this? If you're not sure, look it up really quick. It does not take long to search these things up. I will say, please don't ask AI to make your elements accessible. Please don't do that. And the reason I'm saying that is because I did ask Claude to do that. I gave it the image, I asked it to create this, and the first version that it created was, let's go take a look. It looks fine. But first of all, I asked it not to write any CSS, only the HTML. So it just did everything as inline styles. So version 2 is without the inline styles. And it just used divs for everything. And it put a button at the bottom, which whatever, okay. You can make an argument that that's completely fine. Again, you'd want more context. Is that a link? Is it a button? Who knows? Some people in the challenge did do this that way, but I wanted to see, and it did it like this. I'm not going to complain because again, we don't have more context on what that button is actually doing. But then I asked it to, could we have more semantic HTML? So it started with the article. Okay, fine. Article. Oh, look, it actually used the header. I don't know why it decided to put a small. I think somebody in the challenge used small there too. I don't really use small very often. I don't know. It feels like a weird one to me. Whatever. It used the header, which is fine. It did that as a small instead of a span. It did a heading, paragraph. It put the footer. Then in the footer, which again, I don't think we needed, it did put a span with an area hidden if true around the little icon, which is fine. But on this really simple thing, I guess most of these things were okay, but this is the type of thing that scares me, is it makes these types of mistakes all the time, where it's putting a link with a roll of button. That does not make it more semantic. And this is the type of thing when you're asking the AIs to make things semantic, these are the types of mistakes that it does all the time. Like this, if you're going to do a link, make it a link. If it's gonna be a button, make it a button. This is now effectively a button that just happens to be an HTML element. So like which I think would mean that it doesn't have the functionality of the button, that you'd have to reprogram into it to make it a button. So you've made a link that's a button that doesn't have the functionality of the button, that you then have to use JavaScript to bring in when it could have just been a button. This does not make it more semantic. And this is the type of thing that AI does all the time when it comes to trying to make things more accessible. Probably because the resources for accessibility are hit and miss and not great. And I don't think it actually looks at the resources for accessibility. I think it just scours GitHub repos, and there's so many bad examples out there that it grabs from those. It wouldn't surprise me. I don't know. Maybe one day it will get better at them, but for the time being, it tends to be really bad. And just writing HTML in general, it tends to be pretty hit and miss because of this entire thing of HTML being really hard and the semantics and the context of all of the things being pretty difficult as well. So yeah, again, let me know in the comments down below how you would organize this. And with that, I would like to thank my enabler of awesome, Andrew, as well as all my other patrons and channel members for their monthly support. And of course, until next time, don't forget to make your corner of the internet just a little bit more awesome.